I yield now to Representative Sheila Jackson Lee.
Let me thank the gentleman from New York for yielding, and as has been stated by my colleagues, I want to add my applause as well for the thoughtfulness of the gentleman's leadership on a number of issues, but certainly his pronounced leadership on criminal justice reform and on the Judiciary Committee, and then to be joined by former leader of the Ohio State Legislature, and she has not forgotten her talents of leadership, and that is Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, who joins us. And if I might put words in both your mouths, with a sense of outrage about where we are today. And I say that because I would like to stand here with an enormous amount of outrage for where we are and why we are here. I want to add my appreciation to the Congressional Black Caucus and the chairman, Mr. Butterfield, and of course, Congresswoman Dr. Kelly, who has been a great leader on the issues dealing with health care. And I just want to cite to her a lady that came to this Congress more than a decade ago, Deborah Prothrow Stith. You may have read her writings, and she pronounced during that time that violence, gun violence, was a health crisis. And that was some many years ago. And unfortunately, with all of her expert writings, we still couldn't get movement. I'm going to take a slightly different perspective, and if I could just take these few moments to give you an anecdotal story, which many of you might find absolutely with a great deal of shock, if you will. And that is the limit to which gun rights advocates who mislead the American people on any ideas for gun safety or gun regulation as taking guns away. I was in a meeting where someone was trying to understand why President Obama, in his excellent presentation about securing America and protecting our children from gun violence, was being associated with the idea of taking over 345 million guns. This is what is represented to be President Obama's message. He will confiscate through his process of gun testing or making sure that there are background checks for everyone, that he wanted to confiscate 345 million guns, which has been determined to be located in 65 million places here in the United States. Can I, in a public forum on this august floor of the House, say that we as members of Congress, and I think Republicans will admit this, have no evidence, no documentation that the White House intends to confiscate guns. No manner of level of increased ATF officers could ever do that. Why this misrepresentation, mischaracterization is here. But listen to this. Gun rights advocates have made a lot of claims over the years that the Second Amendment they interpret means that they can buy virtually any gun they want and take it pretty much anywhere. Well, basically, that does exist, except for the basic constraints of background checks, which now the president has expanded to ensure that if you are in a gun show, this is a gun show loophole, and you're sitting next to the stall of a licensed gun person, and you're in the business of selling guns, why shouldn't you be either licensed or require basically background checks? But listen to this. In an ongoing legal battle in Florida, they lay claim to a newfangled Second Amendment right, the right not to have anyone talk to gun owners about their guns. Specifically, gun advocates don't want doctors discussing guns or the potential harms that guns may cause with their patients. And while mere talk about guns might seem to have nothing to do with the right to keep or bear arms, the advocates contend that the Constitution is on their side. Last month, for the third time in the same suit, a federal court of appeals agreed. This is very bizarre. The case is filed under the name of Woolschlager versus the governor of the state of Florida. Although First and Second Amendment buffs may recognize it under the cutesy name Docs versus Glocks, it started when some gun owners and the National Rifle Association told Florida legislators that their doctors were harassing them by asking about gun safety. The legislators responded by passing a law that bars healthcare workers from discussing or recording anything about their patients' gun ownership or safety practices that could be deemed in bad faith, irrelevant, or harassing. 12 other states are thinking about it, and now we have the Firearms Privacy Act. This is in the face of the number of homicides that are in this country, and let me cite to my colleagues that America is the #1 country out of Western nations that has the highest number of cases of homicide by firearm per 100,000. The closest that comes to them is 0.7 by Italy. Then Taiwan, Canada, Spain, 0.2, Germany, 0.2. And all the news stories that we see on violent disruptions in various places and protests, there are numbers of gun violence on homicides is minuscule. Australia, 0.1. UK, 0.1. France, 0.1. South Korea, 0.03. And finally, Japan, 0.01. If that doesn't get our attention, I don't know what does. Then look at this map. This map, 353 mass shootings in America in 2015. My colleagues can see. Is this anything to be proud of? Mass shootings not by knives, not by throwing stones, but by guns. This is what America is to the world. A sea of red of mass shootings. So much so that you can't even see background in some of the parts of this nation. And yet, there are laws that are being passed to stop health professionals from asking whether you have guns that might in fact endanger your children or yourselves. Thank you. On average, more than 100,000 people in the United States are shot in murders, assaults, and other crimes. More than 32,000 people died from gun violence, including 2,677 children under the age of 18. Gun deaths, justified versus criminal. Studies also found that for every one justified homicide in the United States involving a gun, guns were used in 44 criminal homicides. In all of our communities, we see young black men being felled by gun violence. Young people in our communities being felled by gun violence. Or innocent storekeepers being felled by gun violence. Or in the instance of the Philadelphia police officer, that all of us respect the dangers of law enforcement, recognizing that we can work together by building prepared and trained law enforcement officers to avoid the violence with guns. But in this instance of this individual who point blank shot at an officer with a gun, who has now been determined possibly to have heard voices, though he said he was inspired by ISIS. Again, someone wanted to suggest that it wasn't anything that Obama could have done. It was a stolen police gun, and it's out on the streets. And obviously, we don't have enough people enforcing against the trafficking of stolen guns. Mass shootings. The U.S. has a far higher number of mass shootings than any others I've indicated. Mental health. Approximately 1 in 4 American adults have a mental illness. And every time we hear of these mass shootings, defense comes, which they have a right to talk about this person's severe criminal mental illness condition. Guns and suicide is a leading cause of related deaths in America. More than 60% of deaths by guns in the country are the result of individuals using these weapons, intending to commit suicide. Not knives, not stones, not even poison or overdose on drugs. Guns and domestic violence provide a deadly outcome. Law enforcement killed by guns. Each year, hundreds of law enforcement officers lose their lives in gun violence, having been shot to death while protecting their communities. And of course, we know that we have experienced tragic incidences under the authority of law where people have been killed, and the community is over the top in frustration. Background checks check lives, and the tragedy of Mother Emanuel is the individual went to buy guns and the store owner said, you know, it's taking too long. And so I support President Obama's very astute and thoughtful approach. And out of that, I'm very glad to have introduced 2 initiatives. One, 4315, Mental Health Access and Gun Violence, which is to capture President Obama's, along with Karen Bass. And I encourage my colleagues to sign on to 4315, which authorizes $500 million for health treatment access and to assist in the reporting of relevant disqualifying mental health information to the FBI's background check system, NICS, not to violate the privacy, but to give more information to the database, because that certainly would be part of saving lives. And then, as I conclude, HR 4316, that I'm pleased to have joined me in this, Congresswoman Kelly, the Gun Violence Reduction Resources Act that authorizes the hiring of 200 million additional ATF agents, the very points of which my Republican friends are saying, but yet they're condemning what the president has offered. I would say to my colleagues in closing, if we don't do this for any other reason, to take and codify the president's initiatives on NCIS, on data collection, on research regarding safer guns, on background checks and closing the gun show loophole, if we don't do it, we should do it for the children. From December 2012 to December 2013, at least 100 children were killed in unintentional shootings, almost 2 every week, 61% higher than federal data reflect. About 2/3 of these unintended deaths, 65%, took place in the home or vehicle that belonged to the victim's family, most often with the guns that were legally owned but not secured. I remind you of that Supreme Court challenge or that law in Florida where doctors can't secure information to protect the patients or the children of these families. More than 2/3 of these tragedies could be avoided if gun owners stored their guns responsibly and prevented children from accessing them. I've introduced legislation on gun storage. I call it safety and responsibility, but yet unfortunately is perceived as attacking the Second Amendment. My good friend from New York, let me thank you for yielding this time and allow me to just leave us with the point that as the Congressional Black Caucus stands on the floor, we need partners in doing the right thing. And I hope before the president leaves office, he'll have the opportunity to reasonably and rationally sign bills that will save lives. I yield back.
Thank the distinguished gentlelady for yielding back and for